Deathsprint 66 is a new, innovative, creative type of racing game. And there's no microtransactions, there's no battle pass, it's a premium game. You're not buying early access with the promise of future features. It's a game you can buy right now. It's got tons of content, tons of tracks, cosmetics you earn for doing rewards, not by pre-ordering the game or something like that. It also feels really polished. There's leaderboards that are working right now. This is exactly the sort of game that I want to support. I've been complaining for a while about microtransactions in games and the sort of games as a service model that lots of developers are using, and the danger of free-to-play games to creativity and new games coming out. So it feels right to want to support a game like this, a game that is doing everything that I want other games to do. So you might see a few more videos from me over the next few weeks, months and years wanting to celebrate this kind of game, because I think this is the sort of game that you should be supporting. As a disclaimer, I did get sent a free code for this game. I didn't buy it myself. But this isn't a sponsored video. They didn't ask me to make a video. They didn't ask me to say anything in particular about the game. So let's get started. What exactly is Deathsprint 66? It's a racing game where you are running, you're not in a vehicle of any kind, so that already makes it a little bit different. And it's called Deathsprint because it's got that kind of Running Man vibe. There's a lot of traps, there's a lot of weapons that your competitors can use, and you can die really easily. But because this is a bit futuristic, they're saying that there's clones, so as soon as you die, a clone is immediately deployed to the racetrack a little bit behind where you were, just like a reset, and then you can keep on going. There's a bunch of different modes that we'll talk about in a moment, but essentially you are trying to be the first one across the finish line. You can be racing against bots, and the AI bots are pretty realistic really. They make mistakes, they will try and screw you over, they don't just stick to a racing line, or there are other players. When I was playing earlier today, obviously off-peak times, at first I couldn't find any players. I was just racing against bots. By the time it got to about 10 in the morning, half past 10 in the morning, then I started finding more and more real players. And in these PvP matches, you literally just go into the mode. You're like, yep, I want to do PvP. And you'll start on the starting line and go straight into a track, and you don't know what that track's going to be like. Some of them are sprints where you're just doing one lap of a course that often is incredibly lethal. Like there's so many dangers, like massive lasers that can be spinning around, or big grinders that you need to jump over or avoid. It's super, super dangerous, and your job is just to try and get to the end ahead of your opponents. Then there's some tracks which are more like, you know, you're drifting around, because there is a drift button in this, so you can kind of skid your way around, and there's less obstacles. It's more about speed, it's more about being first, and so you're going around maybe 5 laps of a course. Some of them are 3 laps, some of them 4, some of them 5. And you're going around. Some of the tracks even have multiple different routes. So there's like higher up routes that are maybe a bit safer, but a bit trickier to access at the beginning, or lower down routes that are much more dangerous, but offer a more direct path. It's really cool how these tracks seem to kind of branch out. It feels like there's quite a lot of different tracks available from the beginning, and some parts have kind of sections that seem familiar, sections that seem similar to the other tracks, and some of them seem completely different. You'll see entire sections that just blow your mind with how challenging they can be. While you're racing, you can sprint using the right trigger. It does suggest you use a controller. I think there is keyboard and mouse support, but controller's probably best. And you can drift with the left trigger. You can also earn surge, which is like a boost, and the game is super generous with this. There's little lightning bolts all over the place that you can collect to gain more surge, or you can do things like drifting, you know, to look cool, and then you gain a bit as well. But the problem is when you use surge, you lose a little bit of control. Like most racing games, the faster you go, the more understeer there is, the harder it is to make sort of fine adjustments. So often you end up using surge and throwing yourself off the track, or throwing yourself straight into a laser grid. There's also a bunch of pickups, and this works a little bit like, you know, Mario Kart games. So you'll get things like a buzzsaw that you can throw forwards, or a proximity mine you can throw behind you, or a shield. If you're further back, it seems like sometimes it gives you more powerful bonuses, so like a massive buzzsaw that will take out everybody in front of you. Or there's this like rage mode where you seem to be invincible for a while and you kind of don't need to worry about obstacles. There's also a few other twists while you're racing, like if you die too many times it puts you in a shame skin, so you kind of lose the cosmetics that you were normally wearing, and instead you look like a crash test dummy because you've just died so many times, and that sticks with you up until the end. So if people are spectating you at the end, they'll just see that you're in a crash test dummy skin and know, yeah, this guy's been messing up quite a lot. But in the moment-to-moment gameplay, it's an absolute rush. Like, you're gliding around, jumping on rails that you're grinding on, or hanging off these kind of zipline type things, doing wall running and flips. And whereas in most racing games you kind of have the idea of a perfect line and you're trying to do your best to stick to that while sometimes having to worry about overtakes or defending, in this, because so many of the obstacles are constantly moving around the track and there's so many power-ups being used, so many mines being dropped or buzzsaws being thrown at you, you're all the time having to adapt and react to what's going on around you. And that feels really, really cool. The closest thing I could probably compare it to is Split Second, which is a Disney racing game from the Xbox 360 era, which I absolutely adored. I think it's an absolute crime that they haven't made a sequel to that. But in that, you constantly had the track changing around you as your competitors used abilities to do that. In this, there's just so much going on, like other racers can barge into you and kind of knock you out to the side. Things will be swinging across the course, some things are rotating. Maybe you'll want to be getting up onto the higher track, but you'll miss a jump or something, so you'll have to try and kind of decide what you're going to do to get down to the lower track. There's so much going on at any particular moment that you've always got decisions to make. And sometimes it'll just seem overwhelming. Like, it just seems there's too many obstacles, there's too many power-ups, and you're constantly getting destroyed. And other times you'll get into this amazing kind of flow state where you'll be leaping across walls, you'll be jumping across chasms, you'll be sliding around things. When you're hanging off zip lines, you can kind of lean one way or the other to avoid obstacles, and you'll be weaving in and out of power-ups, and it'll just all feel absolutely amazing. And everything that I've just been talking about so far, that's just the races. On top of the races, there's also a kind of PvE challenge mode where you've got some different single-player challenges that are the same every time. So maybe it'll be something like you've got to get through these little circular gates to extend your timer like old arcade racers used to be, and you have to try and get to the end without your timer running out. Some of them will only give you a limited number of lives, so you've got to try and get around the course and still win a race without dying at all, or maybe you've got like 3 lives or 5 lives. There's a load of different challenges. Some of them are really, really difficult, so they'll keep you, on your toes all the way through, and some of them are a bit more forgiving, so maybe you'll keep on doing them to try and get the best possible time. As I mentioned earlier, there are also leaderboards and things like that. To be honest, it is super refreshing to play a multiplayer-focused game that seems to be giving you all of the content up front. It's just, here is the game, go and have fun with it. And there's a ton of stuff you can do already. You're not having to wait and think, oh, okay, well, in a couple of months, Season 1's going to start, and then we'll be able to do this, this, and this. No, it's just like, go for it now. Choose a track and start trying to get the best time possible. There's a practice mode if you want to have a go at it, just to try and get the best lap time. Or if you want to be doing races, you'll be leveling up and unlocking new stuff as you do that. There is this kind of hype meter that I don't really understand, where basically after you complete a race, you'll get given a certain score, and I think it's based on things like how long did you go without having to die and use a clone, or how many sort of drifts did you do, and how many cool stunts did you do. Did you use lots of different kind of elements on each lap around a track, something like that. And that kind of gives you an extra incentive to try and show off a little bit as you're going round, which is really, really cool. It just feels like an incredibly generous package. Also, I said right at the beginning that this is a very polished game. I think it looks really good. It definitely is like an indie game, it's not got AAA graphics or anything like that, but it's fast, it's got a very distinctive style of its own, a load of the skins are cool, it's got that kind of grungy, slightly lo-fi aesthetic, but it's also 3D, very futuristic, and that's a nice combination. It's like a really grimy, violent version of Tron almost. And there's so many little touches that add to that. So from the sound effects, when you get absolutely minced by a laser cutter or a grinder, there's just a really satisfying squelch. A lot of my viewers, when I was streaming this earlier, were like, oh my god, that sound is absolutely disgusting. And you actually hear it quite a lot. Like, if you finish a race and you do really well, then everyone who comes after you, as they hit the finish line, they're just minced into body parts. It's super gory, but because it's kind of very stylized as well, rather than being disgusting, it's more on the kind of funny end of the scale. And similarly, when everything's going really well, then everything looks amazing. Like the lighting, the sort of special effects and stuff like that. It's almost like when you're playing a game like Res, where it gets kind of hypnotic with all of the neon lights flashing around and you just darting around in the center of the screen, avoiding everything. So I've been super positive so far, but are there any negatives about this game? I mean, maybe a couple. First of all, obviously it's new out. I think it came out yesterday. The player population is kind of low at the moment. So if you're playing at off-peak times, or maybe if you're in a region where there's not many people, you might not find many other human players and you'll end up racing against bots a lot. In my experience, the bots don't actually race all that differently to other human players. The big difference is, I think, if you fall behind, like you make lots of mistakes, the bots will kind of slow down to give you a chance, whereas human players obviously won't, so they're a bit more challenging in that regard. And occasionally, very occasionally, there's a few checkpoints that feel super punishing. Like you can just end up dying over and over because the checkpoint puts you at a point where you can't build up enough momentum to get over the next obstacle. But I've only really seen that happen like twice out of all of the tracks that I've tried so far. So, is Deathsprint 66 worth it? I would say 100% yes. Like I said at the beginning of the video, not only is this an awesome racing game in its own right, but it's also kind of embodying a lot of the things that lots of us have been wanting for a long while. It's super creative, you know, it's something that I don't think any game has really tried before. It's not using microtransactions, it's not using a battle pass, it's not early access, it's not free to play or anything like that. It is a game at a fair price point. I think it's 24 euros right now, so a pretty fair price point for the amount of content you get. It's super polished. They've just brought it out and said, hey, here's a fun game, do you want to buy it? And I think you should. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more stuff like this, where I recommend games that I think are doing the right thing, games that are a lot of fun, make sure you leave a like on this video and let me know in the comments below. Also, if you've given this game a try or you've got any questions about it, leave that in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.